You are with Wade, and this is Wade World. So, today's question, a question that will upset almost all of the world's education systems and your governments, is crime genetic? The reason we come to this is because the first point that Wade is going to tell you about is that the crimes in every society, and we're going to take the most obvious crimes, violent crimes, hurting people physically, robbing them, and violently breaking into their arms, murders, killing, etc. Whether you are from a European races, from Eurasian races, Asian, African, South Asian, South American, the one common denominator you will find among these criminals is that they have, we're talking about men, higher testosterone and lower IQ. Number one, this is well proven. If you have a higher IQ, then you commit more non-violent crimes. That's why a lot of Europeans commit white-collar crimes. And as you grow darker, the IQ drops, the violence in the crimes increases. Right. This is well known. People don't do studies on them, or if the studies are done, they're suppressed because this is something that is easily observable. So, if the violent criminals of society have the genes for low IQ and the gene for high testosterone, then it's very easy to predict that these people are going to not follow the law. Now, what the law is definitely not always justice, because the law is basically decided by the people in power against the people without power. And governments is basically a gang of lawbreakers who seized power and now are the lawmakers. So we're not going to get into the moral discussion of law, because in one country it might be absolutely fine to punch another guy. There's no jail time for that. Another country, even a little bit, little bit of masculine violence will land you in jail. These are basically effeminate countries, countries in a decline with weak men and run by girly men. Girly men hate violence, just like girls, right? But unlike girls, they don't get turned on by it later. They don't get aroused by it. So we've established the baseline. The commonality of violent crime is the genetic, and the genetics are for high testosterone, lower IQ. Corollary to this is the lower the IQ, the more propensity to violent crime. So that basically destroys the lie of equality, doesn't it? Because now you're telling me that there is a genetic component to the types of crime people do? Yes, there is. Thirdly, and we'll extend this in a very interesting way, violent crime is a certain subset of genetics that are maybe disruptive to some societies, but very useful in warfare. So, if you want to win a war, what you do want are your soldiers, the people on the front lines, to be violent and have that drive to attack the enemy. So, these are useful. That is why they have genetically survived through the ages. They are useful for war. So we are basically the entire world's present system, almost the entire world's present system is absolutely incorrect, because they are trying to adhere to the lie that everybody is equal, whereas the reality is the crime is genetic. Criminality is genetic. So unless you are willing to give multi-million-dollar gene therapy to the guy who broke into a shop, shot somebody, and tried to rob it, you're not helping him. You're not going to be able to alter the genetics. Now, some of you might say, well, I spent so much time in prison, blah, blah, blah. Yes, but in prison, if you spend a long enough time, your body is literally going to start declining hormonally. Your testosterone levels fall off as you age. In prison, you're not eating the best food, you're not living the best life. You're probably highly vitamin D deficient, which has a massive impact on testosterone and hormones. So as you get older, you're still stupid, but you don't have that angry energy. And this is especially relevant if you live in any of the English-speaking countries, the US, the UK, Canada, Australia, New Zealand. Your food supply is basically poison. Out of all of these five countries, the highest testosterone, in spite of the genetically modified food supply, in spite of the female hormones in the water, in spite of the birth control being pumped into men, observationally, and these observations would coincide with tests, the highest testosterone between America, Canada, Australia, UK, and New Zealand would go to either America or Australia. This is just a fact. And we're not talking about, oh, the minorities. We're talking foundational people who built these countries. America was built by British settlers. Australia was built by white British convicts, both white. And the lowest testosterone levels would be found in the UK. This is without a doubt a fact. Now, it's because your culture suppresses it, your food suppresses it, your medication is literally designed to suppress your testosterone. That's why the UK is being overrun as an invasion, and all they can do is debate on TV and complain about it online and then get arrested and complain about it some more. Right. So, if we take the observed reality of all human history and we take genetics, which reluctantly admits that yes, there are genes for multiple things. There are genes for eye color, hair color, there are genes for intelligence. They just don't tell you that. High IQ parents have a very, very high probability of having high IQ children. A great example is Ashkenazi Jews. These people are very high IQ and very tribal. They only intermarry each other. And they are mega successful because they pass on those traits to their children. Of course, they have 37 genetic disorders unique to them because they inbreed so much. But again, they are applying genetics. Another very old system, we have a 5,000-year-old system of genetics that you can actually look forward to. You don't even have to do studies. You can look at the 5,000-year-old people who knew this. That would be the Aryan caste system. The Aryan caste system started as a meritocracy, and as all meritocracies come to the conclusion after some time, similar people at similar merit levels marry and produce children at a similar merit level. So you might as well make it hereditary, which of course is unfair if you completely cut off the meritocracy part. There should be some kind of hybrid. But if you look at the Aryan system, they had four levels of castes. They had the Brahmins, who were bred for intelligence, the most intelligent people. They had Kshatriyas, who were the warriors, the biggest fighters, the kings. They had Vaishyas, who were the merchants. So your Jews, people like them would come in this category. And then they had the Shudras. So these are the manual laborers. From an IQ perspective, it's a very simple pyramid. Brahmins on top, Kshatriyas, Vaishyas, and then the Shudras. Now, if you want to look at the product, and the caste system also enforces same caste marriage. It discourages very highly going away from your caste. So if you want to see the results of 5,000 years of a literal genetic breeding program and a genetic experiment, you can take the average IQ of the average Brahmin in India, the average IQ of the average Shudra in India, what they call scheduled caste or Dalits or whatever, and then you can compare the difference, the massive difference, right? So we have proof that genes dictate intelligence and a host of other qualities. Now, the problem with this truth is that it destroys the worldview that has been forced down your throat, that all the races are equal and everybody's equal. Number one, if we take it from a very macro perspective, if there is a race that has adapted to have high testosterone and low IQ due to environmental pressures, which is basically going to be people who live in extremely hot countries with plentiful food, no incentive to overthink to survive, no incentive to coordinate and work with others, right? There is no incentive to cooperate. So if you take this genetic result and extrapolate it, it would be immediately visible to you that races with very low IQ and very high testosterone on average are going to be more violent. So their system of society needs to take that into account. Majority of them, we're talking the probability, 99.99999% of the people. Of course, if that 0.00001% is the exception, but you can't make society based on the exception. If there's a billion people in the society, everybody likes the color white and one dude likes the color yellow, you're not going to force everybody else to like the color yellow. That's why they're called the minority or the exceptions. They can enjoy yellow on their own, but they have to live with the people who like the color white, right? So if your genetics and your education system and your criminal justice system is dishonest about the genetic link between crime and the race of the perpetrator, then you are basically living in a fake society, a false society, and run by girly men. Remember, girly men hate reality. They love chaos because reality slaps them in the face with the fact that they are at the literal level of geeks and in carnival sideshows. We could say nerds, but at least nerds have some intelligence, right? Geeks were originally, this is a term for someone who was so socially undesirable that the only way he could attract people to a carnival or freak shows was by biting the heads off live animals. That's the origin of the word geek, by the way. So now, if you take this into account, you cannot take an African from Mozambique and put him in a jail in Oslo, Norway, because the people in Norway have a different genetic makeup and require different ways to deal with their criminal tendencies according to the society. And the guy from Mozambique requires a different criminal system to deal with it. For example, this very accurately predicts, this genetic thought process, right? These genetic extrapolation very accurately predicts the degree of crime and the recurrence of crime someone will do. If a 15-year-old Norwegian, and we're going to make this very easy, right? We're going to take Japanese, let's say German or Norwegian, Japanese, German, Norwegian, let's say Mexican, and we're going to say Nigerian. So Japanese, German, Mexican, Nigerian. If a Japanese kid, as a teenager, everybody's hormones are pumping, you want to do stupid stuff. If a Japanese kid shoplifts and he is caught, most of the time, a very strong talking to and scaring him with the threat of consequences is enough to put him on the straight road for the rest of his life. That's genetics, because the Japanese are high IQ and comparatively lower testosterone than Europeans. This is a fact. This is how they've evolved. They're case selected instead of R selected. We'll come to that in another video. A German kid, he shoplifts, right? You might have to throw him in the jail for like overnight or a day or two and put a little stronger scare in him, like, hey, don't shoplift. And that's the end of that. I'd be like, oh, damn, man, I got in trouble. I don't like this. It's probably not good. I understand. And that's what a lot of European countries are mistaking, that their systems will work on others with completely separate genetics and in sometimes diametrically opposed genetics. Now, a Mexican, if that kid steals and shoplifts and you don't put him in jail or give him a harsher initial sentencing, he's definitely going to be like, ah, that was nothing. I can deal with it. So he's going to go on and commit more serious crimes. And the Nigerian, vast majority of you might not like this, if you start with shoplifting and you're not given a much tougher sentence than the other guys, you're definitely going to, graduate to scamming or robbing or stealing. Now, this might hurt your feeling. You'll be like, I'm not like that. Well, if you're really high IQ, you will understand that the majority of your people share the same characteristics that are very evident in pattern recognition, right? Now, a lot of you might be saying, oh, this is like apartheid. Apartheid in South Africa, it was discriminatory. Well, there is a saying in English, a man of discriminating tastes. How the hell are you going to set up a society or be successful if you do not have the ability to discriminate between reality and fiction? You're basically trying to argue that genetics is irrelevant when these things matter, but genetics is very relevant in everything else that you want to matter. So you're basically a low IQ or a mid IQ person who is picking and choosing parts of science that he likes while ignoring the harsh reality. Truth is pretty harsh, pretty strong, and you're trying to ignore it. Cherry picking doesn't work, right? So this is an interracial example of how different races and different societies need to punish their members differently to have the same effect of putting them in the on the straight and narrow, in the right line of thought and reasoning, and on the right path. So, Nigerian system of justice might seem extremely harsh to someone from Norway, and the Norwegian system of justice might seem like a joke to someone from Nigeria, and they're both justified in their own way. Now, more importantly, let's bring it down to your own race. Let's suppose you are American, and America is a vast nation. It has multiple different subcultures. It is the United States of America. So let us suppose you are an American in the state of Tennessee, a white American in the state of Tennessee. Now, within your neighborhood, so let's say you're in a small town in Tennessee, within your neighborhood, you will immediately, while growing up, while going through school, while playing with the other kids, understand that, all right, this boy, he tends to be stupider, crueler, more violent. And this guy, he's going to be more studious, more calmer, less violent. And so you can genetically predict that as they both grow up, the guy who is crueler and bullies and more violent is probably going to grow up to be more of a criminal according to your laws of justice. Now, if we take genetics as the truth, then you can understand that, all right, this kid has the genetics for violence, for rule breaking. So he's an unstructured, chaotic force, but acknowledging it and the ability to channel it by assessing, all right, is this person completely retarded and absolutely useless, or does he have the minimum IQ required, which should be above 85? Because 85 was originally retarded. The United States changed it to 70 because it was like 80% of African Americans have an average IQ of 85, which is retarded. And these are white mixed average Africans in America. So, if genetically you can understand the profile, you can be like, all right, this guy, he's not very smart, but he's not retarded. He has the capacity for violence. He doesn't mind violence. He has the capacity to rule break. So this person probably is going to be disruptive in a structured society, but going to be very useful in the defense of the structured society where these qualities make for an excellent warrior or defender, right? Whereas the guy who is not as violent, more studious, calmer, is probably going to be somewhat of a liability without training on the front lines and defense, but they would fit very well in the society and probably contribute to it. There's nothing against the individual who has slightly lower IQ, higher testosterone, more violent tendencies. There's nothing against the person who has lower testosterone, higher IQ, and less violent tendencies and more thinking tendencies, right? But they need to be able to find their place in society, and society needs to be set up so that they both can. Now, are there low IQ people who are not violent? Of course, but they usually come with low testosterone, or in very rare cases, you get lucky, right? But it is the way we as human beings work. We are hormonal, biological machines. Nothing in education will tell you this, because telling you this breaks the foundations of society apart. It literally makes you question why we live in a democracy, if you live in a democracy where everybody's vote is equal, if everybody's so unequal. And now there are a lot of people, maybe in the comments, maybe in clips, they'll be like, oh, this is so racist, this is so that. Stop with the bullshit. There is a gene that they have found has the highest incidence in Africans. It's the M1OA1 gene. They call it the warrior gene, but it's better to call it the primitive gene or the jungle gene. This gene shows a propensity towards extreme acts of random violence and a propensity to be hair triggered, thin skinned, very violent. So basically, it's like being in the jungle with a wild animal. And it's not that this is the entire genetic component, but the frequency of this gene, researchers themselves have said, and now they'll regret saying it, is the highest in Africans, in African-derived populations. And we can see this. If you live in a homogenous country without much Africans, well, you will not understand what it is like to live in a multicultural shithole that the current girly men want to rule over. Because in a multicultural shithole, right, you can stir everybody against each other and then rule from behind by putting yourself at the top of the victim agenda. So Genetically, we have confirmed that some races and their derivatives are going to be significantly more violent than others because the others literally lack that gene. Multiple movies in multiple languages also mention this, that they have something that we as human beings have moved beyond or we've lost to the benefit of civilization. Definitely. You can't have civilization. Look at Africa before it was colonized. They hadn't even invented the wheel or had a written language. And lying about history, it's a very Jewish thing to do. So just stop with the nonsense. A lot of African accomplishments come from white mixed Africans. And the percentage of Africans who are genetic IQ anomalies, this is hilarious because this was also stated by WAYDE. There's a country in Africa where 500,000 or 385,000 children were given a reading test, and out of like, let's split the difference, call it 400,000. Out of 400,000 children in this country that were educated, only 5 could read at a globally acceptable level. 5 out of 400,000. That's 1 in 100,000. If you want to divide it into numbers, this is like 0.0001%. So spare me the exceptions that you know. And to judge exceptions, again, genetically, you have to have a much higher IQ than the standard. You can't be an average 100 IQ guy and be judging exceptions. No, you have to have an average IQ at least 120, preferably more, but at least 115, which is a standard deviation in IQ test. And again, a lot of people criticize, oh, IQ tests are racist. How are IQ tests racist? IQ tests are literally pattern recognition. A stupid, ignorant person will not be able to solve them, and a genius sitting in the jungles of the Amazon will be able to immediately see the patterns, even if he doesn't understand the language. The pattern symbology is very easy to see. So, if criminality is genetic, and our systems don't treat the genes for criminality, or they don't channel the criminality genetics, because again, crime is dictated by what the society thinks is useful to it, or not, or harmful to it, not useful to it. So if criminality is genetic, then all of the criminal justice systems are subversive. Unless the criminal justice system brutally honestly says criminality is genetic, these people have a certain propensity to these crimes, and the probability of them doing these crimes is very high. For example, in the United States, some of the biggest billions of dollars of frauds have been perpetrated by Ashkenazi Jews. Sam Bankman-Fried, an Ashkenazi Jew. Who's the other guy who stole billions in a hedge fund scheme in the 90s? Forgetting his name. That was also a Jewish guy. Look at all of these biggest guys who make massive amounts of money by doing financial crime. It's Ashkenazi Jews, followed by white people. If you look at sexual crimes, it's mostly going to be Mexicans, Pakistanis, Indians, so basically slightly darker people. If you look at extremely violent crime, it's going to be basically Africans. And the reason is not that there aren't criminals of these other types and these races, it's that because America is forced to have so many different and disparate races. This is literally the recipe, import Koreans, import the Javanese, import Malaysians, import Nigerians, import Sudanese, import Venezuelans, import everybody from around the world, because there's already a lot of German and white people here, so they don't need to be imported. So you see firsthand that the probability of you walking down the street and getting shot and mugged by a black person is much higher. However, the probability of you walking down the street and your pension being stolen by some random white collar guy who's probably going to be Jewish is much higher that way. For example, if we look at, a lot of people talk about Jeffrey Epstein, Jewish, Ghislaine Maxwell, Jewish. Ghislaine Maxwell's dad, Robert Maxwell, worked for Israeli intelligence and was given the pension fund of a very large national enterprise. And he basically spent it all and was assassinated by the secret services because he was getting too big for his britches. Right. If you look at what other scams can we think of that really clearly point to this? And that 90s scam, if you remember this scam, you should really put it down in the comments. It was, what is it, Bernie something? I think it was Bernie something. Not Bernie Sanders, but again, Bernie Sanders is Jewish. He talks about, oh yeah, yeah, equality, and he has like multi-million dollar properties, right? It was Bernie Madoff. There we go, Bernie Madoff, Jewish, right? So there is definitely a pattern here. 100%. There is a humongous amount of pattern recognition that you can do if you actually get the reality. And then that really makes you think, like, is our justice system really, really just? This doesn't make any sense. Like, why are we treating the kid who is going to grow up to become an upstanding member of society the same as the kid who's going to grow up to become a violent murderer? Wouldn't it be better to appreciate the differences and channel them in different directions? Because you can. You can. So criminality is genetic. Solving it without accepting this is cruel. It's cruel to the people who are classified as criminals. It's cruel to the people who believe in the criminal justice system. And it's cruel to the people who are befuddled and confused over why it doesn't work. It doesn't work because you are anti-reality and you cannot force reality to change. It will come right back and slap you across the face. Reality has a very, very big backhand. And the backhand, when it comes, will knock your head right off your body. All of you pushing towards all this equality nonsense. There are a lot of podcasters out there doing a lot of panels with a lot of different races. So if you really want to see the differences, and you can predict criminality by how people communicate. If the communicating people are by default aggressive, angry. So aggression is a ladder, right? If you are going to be by default aggressive and angry in how you talk, you're going to reach physical violence very easily. If you're calm and collected, it's going to take a lot longer for you to reach the level of physical violence. This is shown throughout history. Europe was conquered by the Muslims for 800 years before they were like, all right, you know what, let's kick these guys out. And they only kicked the Muslims out from Christian territories in Europe. They didn't really go into the already older Christian territories like Morocco, Iraq, Lebanon, Egypt, Syria. And they definitely didn't go back all the way to the Muslim territories in the Arabian desert. Whereas the Muslims, they're much more aggressive, much more dynamically aggressive. These are racial and genetic differences that cannot be solved by putting everybody in the same prison where they make their own race-based gangs and then pretending it's all good. They're all equal. There is a saying in America where you get sentenced to Club Fed. This is for financial crimes. Do you know why Club Fed is so comfortable? It's like a camp where you're locked in and you can't leave for a couple of years. That's financial crimes. Club Fed is very comfortable because these are crimes by high IQ people, usually Jewish people. And Jewish people have been running American prison system for like at least since 1965, after JFK got assassinated, probably before that. And a lot of the people who are non-Jews in this system also have the same affinity to this crime and the same modes of thinking as Jewish people do. So this is the kind of people who are smart enough to steal billions and billions of dollars. So they want to make sure that if they want to make sure that if they go to prison, they're comfortable in prison. If you really want to see how this system treats financial criminals who are a threat to the very corrupt system that we're living in, look at any coders that have been put in prison for going completely outside the system and setting up a parallel system. Again, crimes. Crimes are genetic. The people at the top know it. They deny it to you because denying it to you keeps you confused, keeps you distracted, and they can blame it on 1,000 things. Oh, poor person. Oh, poor upbringing. Oh, didn't have enough money. Blah, blah, blah. In America, we have the best example. There are a vast amount of poor white communities that have not even comparable levels of crime than crimes in rich black communities. This is hilarious. Rich black communities, objectively rich, have higher crime levels than the poorest white communities in America. So if your justice system, and it is in almost every single country, guarantee this, if it doesn't explicitly say it's genetic, and we're going to treat it as a genetic condition, and we're going to find solutions to actually fit these people, in society, or if they're unfit for society, then more drastic measures. Unless your justice system says this implicitly, you are living in a lie. All the excuses they give you are fake, and if you continue to believe them, then you deserve to live in this system because you are like sheep, like cattle. So try not to be cattle, but if you are, it is your nature. And until next time, remember, keep it cool, keep it smart, and as always in Wade World, enjoy.